is Scott McGee. I am here along with 10 of those candidates for a very special Democratic primary debate here at the beautiful Nyack Center. News 12 bringing you this event in partnership with the Westchester and Rockland County Democratic parties, and my colleagues at News 12, Sarah Rosenblum and Sarah Toland, will also serve as panelists with me. Now, we will be discussing the big issues facing the 17th District and our country. We have already reviewed the rules with our candidates, so let's get started with our first question directed to all of those candidates. We will begin with David Buchwald, and Mr. Buchwald, thank you for joining us. The question is, the latest surveys show that President Trump's disapproval rating is higher in the 17th District than the rest of the country on average. I would say significantly so. If President Trump is reelected, how do you plan to rein in the policies you disagree with when you will not have the power to do so? You have 45 seconds to answer.
Scott, let me thank you, Sarah and Tara, for being here with the Rockland, Westchester County Democrat committees, and also Nyack, NAACP, the Hudson Valley, Stonewall, Dems, who are co-sponsoring tonight. This is a crucial question of this race because we have a demagogue in the White House who seems to divide us, and it is absolutely essential that our member of Congress be part of a legislative branch standing up to the chief executive, holding him to account in his administration. That's something I've been doing already. I was a co-sponsor of the Reproductive Health Act, co-sponsor of the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act, and also I sponsored the bill to allow New York State to turn over the state tax returns of top government officials to Congress. President Trump is suing over that law right now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Buchwald. Mr. Carlucci, thank you for joining us, and please let us know what you would do in that situation.
Well, thank you, and I hope that you're wrong, and I hope that President Trump is defeated. I disagree with him on almost everything. However, I'll work to find consensus to make sure that we're delivering for education in our district, that we're fighting against climate change, that we're getting common sense gun control passed, that we're doing the things that need to get done. One of the big issues when I go to Washington is to make sure we're funding the Individuals with Education Disability Act. That's been underfunded for years. We have to make sure we have a partner in Washington, and that's what I'm looking to do, to make sure that our school districts are not fully funded on the backs of property taxpayers. We need a partner in Washington, and I look to hit the ground running as soon as I get there.
Thank you. Asha, Castleberry, Hernandez.
Well, I will continue with the platform that I've been advocating for in Washington, despite that if President Trump is reelected. First and foremost, making sure that people that have been marginalized under his administration are brought to, or their voices are brought to Washington to make a difference. Also, I will continue to advocate for economic security. When you look at issues about affordable housing, the living wage, also addressing healthcare costs. These are issues that we need to address, and I have the political courage to address this in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Evelyn Farkas.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, all of you, for moderating, and thank you for convening this to the Democratic Party of Rockland and everyone else. Look, if President Trump gets reelected, I believe that it would be a dangerous situation for our country to be in, and Congress will have to assert itself when it comes to its legislative prerogatives. I was one of the first people, I was President Obama's Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia. I was one of the first people to ring the alarm about the Russia-Trump connection. Unfortunately, the President is still allowing Russia to interfere in our elections. One of the things we need right now, very urgently, is actually election security. Having said all that, though, I have worked in Congress. 7 years I legislated at the federal level. I'm largely running on my experience, and I will use that experience to get things done. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn Farkas. Allison Fine.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be running for this seat. It is particularly important that the person in this position have the experience and the leadership skills to make sure that they can continue to bring people together to solve difficult problems, and I've done that my entire career. It's also critically important that we understand that 2020 is the beginning of a wide-scale, nationwide progressive movement at all levels of elected office, and we will need to continue to elect progressive people at the local level, state level, and federal level to create a permanent, long-standing progressive majority in this country.
Thank you, Allison Fine. Mondaire Jones.
Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here this evening, and and to see so many people who are interested in electing someone else to this position. We have a tremendous leader, Anita Lowy, and I'm very proud to be running to succeed her in Congress. I'm ready for Congress because for me, policy is personal. And as I think about the terrible situation that might happen where Donald Trump does not get voted out of office, I think to myself that more people like me need to be in Congress, people who are going to fight tooth and nail for the things that we say we believe in as a party. For example, in Article 1, that is where Congress gets its power. The framers felt that Congress was so important that they put it in Article 1, and so we need to use the power of the purse to prevent him from doing things like funding ICE, for example, which is locking kids in cages and tearing families apart, and we've got to use our platform to speak out against the things that he does.
Mondaire Jones, thank you. Shane McGaffey.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much for being here. In New York, we send $22 billion more to Washington, D.C. than we get back. And President Trump made it worse when he signed a new tax law, which capped our property taxes in terms of the deductions at $10,000. And we need people in Congress to fight to keep more of our money here so that our students can get the education they deserve without bankrupting some of the people who live here. I know that many people think that our areas are wealthy, but look down the street, there are a lot of people struggling. If you look at recent reports done by the United Way, in Rockland County, for example, 44% of people who live here are struggling to pay their bills. So I intend to try and go to Congress and to change that and to fight to keep our money here for us. And for more details, please go to my website, ShaneMcGaffeyForCongress.org.
All right, Shane McGaffey, thank you very much. Catherine Parker, excuse me.
Yes, thank you. What I have is a letter from the President's office that scuttled a flood mitigation project for my district, and my staff just found that. Elections have consequences, folks. We need to be all hands on deck, so we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. Besides paying attention to this congressional race, we need to be involved with what happens around the country for the presidential, and we also need to fight for districts, for the Senate districts that could possibly flip. This is really critical. If it doesn't go our way in November, we are going to be in a real terrible situation. I'm used to being in the minority. 8 of my 12 years as an elected official, I've been able to work across the aisle to get things done, but it would be a lot easier if we were all together.
All right, Catherine Parker, thank you very much. Now we have Joanna Rodriguez-Wheeler.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. The Trump administration has gutted environmental protections, the Affordable Care Act, and our social safety net. And I'm running for Congress because I don't think that where you were born, whether you were born here, whether you came here, who you love, how your family came to be, how you worship, I don't think any of those things have mattered. I think that we should be able to live in a country that we recognize, and right now we do not live in that country, and I'd like to restore our country to something that we recognize.
All right, Joanna Rodriguez-Wheeler, thank you very much. Adam Schleifer.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you all for coming here. I think we're all here in part because so many of us are so disturbed by the bully and fraudster in chief who unfortunately inhabits 1600 Pennsylvania right now. I've spent my career as a consumer protection regulator taking on predatory lenders and as a major frauds prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office, in fact in the same office, in the same section that Adam Schiff worked at. I'm so proud of the work that Adam Schiff and others, Hakeem Jeffries and Sean Maloney from New York, have done to take on this president, and I will do exactly as they did to continue to support the rule of law and our basic faith in constitutional governance if I'm lucky enough to be your congressperson. And I would say I would work like Nita Lowy has, even across the aisle with Congresswoman King as she did, to work to lift the SALT tax deduction cap that President Trump has put in as part of his punitive and unfair tax plan. That's the kind of stuff we need to do to take him on if we're faced with another 4 years of this national nightmare. Thank you.
All right, Adam Schleifer, thank you very much for that. We do have just why that makes you qualified for this job. We have about 5 seconds. I know it's going to be quick, so please explain.
I've spent 8 years in federal service, most recently as a federal prosecutor, otherwise known as an assistant United States attorney. It was the honor of my life to stand up and say Adam Schleifer on behalf of the United States, and I hope to do that for all of you in Congress in 2021.
Joanna Rodriguez-Wheeler.
I'm a stay-at-home mom and a small business owner.
All right, Catherine Parker?
Mother, small business owner, and an elected official for the last 12 years, which has really served me well to be ready and prepared to go to Washington to fight for the issues that we care about.
Shane McGaffey?
I'm a father and a husband, and I run Pleasantville Community Television, which is a public local access station. Been fighting for the last 20 years to make sure people have their First Amendment rights.
Mondaire Jones?
I got my start in politics as a freshman in the East Ramapo Central School District, fighting to pass a public school budget, something that other districts take for granted. Fast forward that, I graduated from Stanford University and Harvard Law School. I've worked at the Department of Justice under President
Very long,
Obama.
I'm sorry, we gotta keep going. Allison Fine? 5 seconds.
5 minutes.
5 seconds. Down to 3.
I'm one of the nation's leading experts in the future of technology and intersection with social change, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Network of Elected Women.
Thank you. Evelyn Farkas?
I'm the child of Hungarian refugees who's a 30-year national security veteran. I've worked in Congress and the executive branch, roughly equally divided, worked in Bosnia, in post-war areas, and a whole host of other things. Thank you.
Asha?
I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a combat veteran, served in Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, against terrorism like ISIS. I'm also an educator who taught foreign policy master's degree at Baruch College as well as Fordham University.
Thank you. David Carlucci?
I'm a state senator, and this past year I passed more legislation than any lawmaker in the state of New York.
And David Buchwald?
State Assemblyman, former practicing tax attorney, and father of 2 ages 4 and 2.
Thank you very much. We will be right back. And welcome back to a special debate with the Democratic candidates of the 17th Congressional Primary. I am Scott McGee, along with my co-hosts, Sarah Toland and Tara Rosenblum. We continue now with the individualized questions for the candidates. I remind you have 1 minute for this response. My colleague Tara Rosenblum will get us started.
And we should mention, Scott, that all of these individualized questions were selected at random. We're going to begin right now with Allison Fine. You want to repeal the Hyde Amendment and all abortion bans. There is no appetite for that, as we know, by the Republicans, and you would need 60 votes in the Senate to make it happen. By our count, there is not even 50 right now. So how would you make it happen?
Thank you for the question. As we know, Roe is as close to being repealed as ever, overturned by the Supreme Court. But Roe is a floor. Roe is not a ceiling. There is so much that we need to do to protect women in this country. And regardless of what happens in Congress, we're going to be fighting in 50 states to make sure that every single woman has the opportunity to make the choices she needs for herself and her family. So of course we're going to continue to fight to overturn Hyde, but we're also going to make sure that insurance covers contraception in every state of the country, that women have equal pay, that we are subsidizing child care for women, and we are enabling women to have access to capital to start their own businesses, because right now, less than 3% of venture capital goes to women, and we need to change that.
All right, thank you, Allison. So our next question is for David Carlucci. Many Democrats, and especially party leadership, have argued that your allegiance to the IDC hurt the party and constituents, particularly those in the East Ramapo district. How can you be trusted to fight for democratic values in this turbulent time?
Well, thank you for the question, and I've always fought for progressive values. You can look at my record, and over my time in the New York State Senate, I've passed over 150 pieces of legislation. Some of that dealing with the East Ramapo School District. We were able to get a $3 million fund to restore kindergarten, have after-school activities, and I've always continued to deliver. Under the Democratic majority, I've delivered more legislation than any lawmaker in the state of New York. I have the energy, the experience to hit the ground running and do what it takes to deliver for our district. I wasn't willing to sit on the sidelines. When I got elected to Albany in 2010, it was in the midst of dysfunction. And I did what I had to do to work across the aisle, to work with Democrats and Republicans to deliver results for our district. That's how I've been able to pass more legislation than any lawmaker in the state of New York this past year. And that's what I look forward to doing in Washington. No matter who's the president, I'm going to work tirelessly to deliver for our district, and I believe I have the energy and experience to do that.
All right, thank you, David Carlucci. David Buchwald, this question is for you. You have voted against universal rent control multiple times. Now, activists say it's necessary to protect tenants, but you have seen that differently. You've taken money from corporate campaign donors, including a real estate PAC as well, though. So how do you convince voters you have their interests at heart and not those of corporations?
Well, first, by correcting the record, there's one vote I've cast against rent control of the state. I actually was in favor of continuing the rent control that exists in New York State, downstate. Previously, I voted it as such. The one set of real estate countries is not from a real estate developer, it's from realtors who represent buyers and sellers, renters and landlords. So, in fairness, I don't think anyone can look at any vote I've ever taken and say that it's tied to any contribution. I'm someone who stood up for ethics in government, someone who passed the state constitutional amendment to ban payments of taxpayer-funded pensions to public officials. Frankly, this is all red herring. What is an issue is actual housing affordability. And we have a housing affordability crisis in our country and in our region. And that's only going to be addressed if we actually pass legislation that increases the amount of ability for folks to develop housing. Universal rent control, as Mr. Jones and Ms. Castleberry Hernandez favor, is a one-size-fits-all federal policy that is not going to be right for our region.
Thank you, Mr. Buchwald. Our next question is for Evelyn Farkas. You have made election security one of your top priorities. Recently, it came out that our intelligence agencies believe the Russians, once again, are indeed trying to meddle in our election. How would you protect our election process when much of that meddling is through private social media companies, particularly its users who use their First Amendment rights to spread lies and propaganda?
Well, thank you for the question, Tara. We face an urgent issue right now. The Russian government, the Kremlin, never stopped meddling in our elections. They do it in all kinds of ways. They do it in ways that we can't see, through cybersecurity, where they go in and they sit with their bots and they suck out information only to be used and weaponized later. And then they use Facebook, they use Twitter, they use all the social media to spread lies and to spread disinformation and to divide us against one another. You're right that there is a First Amendment issue, but I believe that the platforms that we use, the internet, the social media platforms, they are not pieces of paper. They are like newspapers, and we need editorial boards and we need regulations in place to protect consumers so that they know what they are consuming, so that they know that there are some standards. We need to really stand back and stand on the side of expertise and truth. We don't have to do it at any cost to our First Amendment rights. So thank you again.
Thank you, Evelyn. Now our question is for Mondaire Jones. The Hasidic bloc vote has been the difference in a number of elections in Rockland County, I think, as we know. Recently, that's created a lot of tension and lawsuits with their neighbors, particularly regarding the East Ramapo School District, which is controlled by members of the Hasidic community, despite the fact none of their children attend school there. Have you courted their support? Why or why not?
I have not courted their support, but I will say this: when you run to represent a district, you run to represent everybody in the district. This is personal for me. I'm a graduate of East Ramapo Public Schools. 97% of the kids in East Ramapo, which is probably the most salient political issue in Rockland County, are black and brown, and 80% of those kids are eligible for free or reduced lunch. As I mentioned, I got my start as a freshman at Spring Valley High School organizing people to pass a public school budget. I was recently on the board of the New York Civil Liberties Union, which has sued the East Ramapo Central School Board to make sure that the parents of public school students finally have representation onto the board. I take issue with David Carlucci for not supporting a monitor bill that would create a monitoring veto power over that school board, and I encourage my colleagues on this stage to speak out in favor of civil rights and civil injustice for the people of East Ramapo, for the students, and for public school students all throughout this district, for that matter. Thank you.
All right, thank you for those answers. We are actually running out of time for this break. We're going to go to a quick break and we'll finish this round here coming up in just 1 minute. Thank you for joining us. We'll be right back. We are now beginning our first of 2 lightning rounds. It's going to go by quick. So each candidate will get the same question. We'll go in alphabetical order, but you'll only get 1 to 2 word answers. So we're going to try to make this as simple as possible. Tara, you go first.
Which of the Democratic presidential candidates have the best chance of unseating Donald Trump? We'll start with Mr. Buchwald and work our way in.
Oh.
We need a name.
Oh, come on.
I use one word, I'm sorry.
Here you go. Carlucci.
We're looking for one name going forward.
I would say Buttigieg or Bloomberg.
Okay.
One name.
All of them. I will vote for any of them before.
I have to say I'd vote for any of them before Donald Trump.
Just a reminder, not just Democrats vote in the election, so keep that in mind. Carry on, fine.
True blue, any Democrat.
I want us to start believing in our candidates. I think all the Democratic candidates can win.
Amy Klobuchar.
Thank you for answering with a name, Mr. McGaffey.
Kathy Parker.
But optimistically, all.
Okay. Joanna Rodriguez.
Bernie Sanders.
Okay. And Adam Schleifer.
Anyone out of a phone book would be better than
And welcome back, everybody. We are now going to begin the first of two lightning rounds. Each candidate will get the same question, and we will go in alphabetical order in this case, so you can only give 1 or 2 word answers. And Tara, we're going to start with you.
And we need you to answer with one name, please, for this next question. We'll start with Mr. Buchwald. Which of your opponents on this stage right now are the least qualified to hold this seat? Not an audience favorite, huh?
I think all the candidates are highly qualified, and I'm honored to debate with them.
Same here, all more qualified.
Yeah, we have great candidates here. It's really a compliment to our It's an honor to run with all of the people here on this panel.
I have tremendous respect for everyone here on this panel.
I think it's great that so many people would want to be involved.
And I think this is democracy at its best.
I believe the same thing. I think that the more the merrier.
We have great options here, and the great news is one of these great folks is going to take over for a legend in Nita Lowey, and that's a great thing for the district.
You guys should have been on the debate stage on Tuesday night. That's what the real answer is. Okay, thank you guys for your quick answers on this one, and we will be right back. And welcome back, everybody, to our special debate coverage of this Democratic primary for the 17th Congressional District. We want to continue our round of individual questions. We want to start with Adam Schleifer. Mr. Schleifer, you are a new face to local politics, however your family name is not. Your father owns one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. So what do you say to critics who look at your family's wealth and think you may be trying to buy this election?
I appreciate the question. I've been a public servant for more than 8.5 years in my life, and I've been devoted to ensuring that everyone gets to live their version of the American dream, and I learned that early in my life from having a special needs brother who didn't have the opportunities that so many of us had to do the things that we get to do, and from having a grandfather who lived with us who was a refugee from the Holocaust and came here not speaking English with a 7th grade education. So I've understood for a very long time, from my earliest days, that I have opportunities that my brother and my grandfather and so many other folks don't get to have, and it's my responsibility, and I exercise that proudly as a federal prosecutor and a consumer protection regulator to ensure that everybody gets their fair chance to live their version of the American dream, whatever that is, and I've been devoted to that, and I'm going to continue to be devoted to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Our next question is for Catherine Parker. You are the only candidate who doesn't live in the 17th district. Why do you feel you are the best candidate to serve the unique needs of the district?
That is correct. I can walk my dog to the district, and often do. And in 2011, a judge redrew the line, made a point that the community that I live in, which Nita Lowey had represented for 23 years, was no longer in the district. So why am I the best qualified? Well, I've been serving as a Westchester County legislator. I was majority leader in the last term, and I passed a lot of significant and progressive legislation. And one of the things that I've worked on for my 12 years as an elected official is climate change and trying to mitigate climate change. And that's as important to the people in Stony Point, as the people in Nyack, as the people in Irvington and Cortland and Peekskill, and yes, even Rye. And I want to be there to help us with this, because frankly, this is the biggest issue facing all of us in this country, all of us obviously in this region. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on to a question now for Asha, Castleberry, Hernandez. You mentioned criminal justice reform as one of your top priorities. Recently, New York on the state level passed a bail reform law that has been controversial, to say the least. There have been examples of people in our area, in this district, what appear to be violent crimes, released without bail, only to offend again. Do you think the law on the books here in New York needs to be tweaked, and if so, what changes would you recommend?
Yes, I do believe that they need to be tweaked. And in fact, these horrific criminal justice bills definitely, or policies definitely impact many people of color, specifically people from low-income areas. So I really appreciate that question. And also, as we are trying to transform the criminal justice system, I'm pretty confident that we're trying to be more progressive at it. We have to also think about the programs that need to be in place in order to accommodate this progressive agenda. For instance, if we have many people that we're pushing to make sure that they get a job, that we have to make sure that they have the quality of life in place. So, for instance, make sure we have mental health programs in place. Make sure they be able to have a quality job. We have to make sure that this is in place so they can be able to achieve the American dream.
All right, Asha, Castleberry, Hernandez, thank you for answering that question. We do have a question now for Shane McGaffey. Mr. McGaffey, you want to incorporate a regional cost index that would benefit New Yorkers because New York is a much more expensive place to live than others. How are you going to get members from rural and cheaper places to go along with that? Because by extension, they would be penalized by such a tax code.
Okay, thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier in the debate tonight, New York pays, because of the cost of living, a lot more. If you look at families that make $77,000 to $165,000, they're paying 22% federal tax. And if you factor in regional costs, they're really making what people in other parts of the country between $24,000 and $77,000 would be making, except they're only paying a 12% federal tax. And so we need to start having a conversation about how the value of money here is less, and we need to start working and building coalitions with states like ours where costs are high to get that done. If we don't start talking about it, it will never happen. People are being priced out of this area. People are struggling, and again, we need to do something about it, and for more information on it, please go to my website, ShaneMcGaffeyForCongress.org.
All right, we got that one. Thank you, Shane. And finally, we turn to Joanna Rodriguez-Wheeler. You've raised near the bottom of the pack in terms of campaign funds. Also, currently, your Joanna for Congress website says, coming soon. What do you say to voters about the seriousness of your candidacy?
I say to voters, wait, please. I'm doing this for the first time. I am new to this, and I take what I'm doing very seriously. So I spent the last 4.5 months studying the issues of the district, studying and speaking to people about what concerns them. And as of tonight, the campaign website will be up. And if it's not up tonight, it will be up tomorrow. But rest assured that it is being worked on actively. We're doing it in-house because funds are short. So if anyone would like to contribute, you can go ahead and do that on Act Blue under my name, Joanna Rodriguez-Wheeler. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much for that. Okay, so we have some more time in this block. We want to use it. We're going to do about 15-second answers on questions to everybody. We're going to start on your side, Adam. And that is, what is your top legislative priority if elected?
locally lifting the cap on the salt tax deduction, and nationally and for the sake of our planet, doing something significant to respect science, regional and international consensus, and fight for stopping climate change and saving our planet.
All right, thank you. And Joanna Rodriguez-Weaver.
My legislative priority is, in fact, the climate change, the climate emergency, really, and making sure that we finally get those infrastructure projects that we've been promised for the last 10 years or so. We need infrastructure improvement. We need to be able to not have a wall down at the base of the Hudson River. We need to protect our wildlife, and we need to restore our habitats to make sure that all the damage that has been done to our environment, especially to our 18 waterfront communities, are like something that we're dealing with. I think that elected leaders...
I think you passed your 15 seconds. Okay, Catherine Parker.
As I mentioned, climate change. And one thing you may not know about me, as in my first term as a county legislator, I created the Office of Sustainability and the position of Energy Director to really help Westchester lead on mitigation for climate change. But I think we can do more than that. I also want to tackle our biggest problem, which is affordability, and I think that that's a multi-pronged issue that, in fact, we can look at climate change as an opportunity to help with that, with the creation of green infrastructure jobs.
Shane McGaffey.
I want to keep more of our money here, and so that we're not subsidizing the red states that are not espousing our values.
Mondaire Jones.
Locally, we've got to get back that salt reduction. Donald Trump penalized us when he capped it at $10,000 in December of 2017. Globally, I support a Green New Deal. It's the only thing that comes close to meeting the urgency of the climate crisis that's on the horizon.
Allison Fine.
I want to ensure that all workers have access to a universal set of mobile benefits. So everybody who works has access to a retirement account, sick days, comp time, and a union. And of course, I would want to codify Roe.
Evelyn Farkas.
So my number one issue is addressing the climate crisis, because the world is on fire and literally melting, and so nothing else matters. But this is not only a national and an international issue, it's a local issue. So what I mean by addressing it, it includes addressing the poor water quality in Rockland, the long overdue need to restore the Piermont Marsh, because it is a barrier to the rising level of the Hudson. It also means dealing with Indian Point and closing it in a safe and economically viable way.
Okay, you got your 15 seconds.
I have more, but...
Yes.
I'm passionate to address the economic challenges in this district, like, for instance, affordable housing, which is always ignored by many people here in this district, as well as the minimum wage. We need to make sure we continue to fight that on a federal level, as well as the student loan debt.
David Carlucci, and also you get an extra 15 seconds to respond to Mondaire Jones.
Well, we must reform our broken healthcare system. I want to make sure that every Rockland and Westchester resident has access to the best healthcare possible.
Go ahead, keep going.
You want me to?
Yeah, you can also respond as well.
East Ramapo.
Yes.
In regards to East Ramapo, there's been no one that has fought harder than myself in the New York State Legislature. I've consistently delivered, whether it was to expand our kindergarten program or universal pre-K, bringing with Grace Vanderwall to bring the Little Miracles Choir, to make sure that we have a $3 million fund in a lockbox controlled by the Commissioner of Education to deliver results. We have a long road ahead of us, but we've made strides forward.
David Buchwald.
Combating the scourge of gun violence in our country. I defeated a Tea Party Republican to represent my state assembly seat. The first vote I cast on a piece of legislation was for the New York Safe Act, the strongest anti-gun violence law in the country, a bill I co-sponsored.
All right, thank you candidates for that. We did it. We've got a few more to go though. All right, and thank you for joining us. We'll be right back. Welcome back everybody to our special coverage of the Democratic primary in the 17th Congressional District, and we are here at the Nyack Center, where we are joined by 10 candidates for that position. If you want to continue our questions, you will have 45 seconds for your responses, and we begin.
Thank you, Scott. We recently at News 12 aired a 2-year investigation I know that many of you watched, called Hate at Home. It documented a stunning rise in hate and intolerance in every pocket, every community of the Hudson Valley, especially targeting members of the Jewish community. And since our coverage, you know what, incidents have only grown more frequent, culminating with that horrific attack in Muncie that brought national headlines around December. So my question for each of you each get 45 seconds to answer, is if elected, what would you do to stop all the hate? We're going to go back to alphabetical order, and Mr. Buchwald will start us off here.
Thanks. Obviously, the first thing to do is take on the leader of promoting division in our country, Donald Trump. But after that, we have to make sure that, first of all, we have an education system that teaches tolerance for those. I think we should have a national law, for example, requiring education about the Holocaust. But I also know that we have to have leaders in our community, and I think our Congress member can be chief among them, that seek to bring people together and to denounce hatred and violence in all its forms. Indeed, the day Congresswoman Lowy announced that she was not running for re-election was a day that we all in Westchester County, government officials, clergy of all stripes, and members of the public were denouncing a desecration of the Holocaust Memorial in White Plains, and we actually have to make sure that sort of leadership is exactly what we have in our next Congress member.
Thank you, Mr. Carlucci.
We have to pass the Never Forget Act, which will teach children of all ages, age-appropriate curriculum about symbols of hate. We must make sure that we're proactive. In the first place, that our children see a swastika or a noose is not at a hate website or on graffiti on a bathroom stall. We also have to hold social media companies accountable. We have to have a way to report hate speech and get it removed from social media. Yes, unfortunately, hate speech is protected under the First Amendment, but when it elevates to violence, we have the right to stop it, and I'm going to be doing that once I'm the member of Congress and make sure that we get legislation passed to hold them accountable.
Asha, Castleberry, Hernandez.
Yes, I strongly believe that we have to have a community-based approach, not only include education as a way of a tool to educate about diversity, accepting one another, accepting our differences, but also use our community centers, churches, all different type of institutions in our community to bring together to be able to address these hate crimes. So I believe in that, and that is something I'll definitely work on the federal level.
A lot of possible solutions here. We move on to Evelyn Farkas.
Thank you for the question. Look, this is a really appalling moment in our history. We all should know better, and so as a member of Congress, I intend to speak out loudly and clearly and call anti-Semitism, racism, what it is when I see it. This president has refused to do so in the face of Charlottesville. He denied what was happening. And as a result, many people feel emboldened to express anti-Semitic and racist perspectives. This has to stop, and so first of all, we need leaders who will call for it to stop. Second, we need education, as my colleagues have pointed out. All too often, people just forget the bad history that has led us to places where we have worked very hard to prevent, again, anti-Semitism and racism. But we also need to protect vulnerable communities like those in Muncie.
Allison Fine, please weigh in.
I am a past president of Temple Beth Abraham in Tarrytown, and after the dreadful event, the attack at the rabbi's house in Muncie, I organized with a rabbi an interfaith service, an interfaith community service, and there I outlined a plan for reducing hate, particularly anti-Semitism, in our district. It includes, of course, education of children, helping them to understand what hate is, and to understand the difference between truth and lies, particularly online. And I also called for community mediators in every community, but particularly here in Rockland, to help people understand one another and to help communities learn how to live together.
Mondaire Jones.
The rise in white nationalism and anti-Semitism under President Donald Trump is unconscionable, and it is something that we must be coming together to fight uniformly. It is something that unfortunately has been taking place, as you mentioned, in Rockland, but also in Westchester counties. Most recently, I was a lawyer for Westchester County in the law department, and one of my responsibilities was, as a legal advisor to the Westchester County Human Rights Commission, to develop a response, a robust response to the rise in hate incidents. And I grew up just a few miles from Muncie, and in fact still live just a few miles from Muncie. We need to come together as a community to speak out. It's why I wrote an op-ed talking about how the black community and the Jewish community historically have been lockstep together in fighting white nationalism. It is the kind of leadership that I would bring to Congress if I'm fortunate enough to be elected.
Thank you. We are quickly running out of time. Let's turn things over to Shane McGaffey.
Thank you. I'm Roman Catholic. My wife is Jewish, and my sister, and the glue of our family growing up, was adopted, and she's African American. And so I've seen a lot of hate, even in Westchester growing up. And we as a community have to start being able to be comfortable dealing with the uncomfortable. We have to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And so much of what I see, I serve in Pleasantville on the school board. And one of the great things about Pleasantville is we don't have Republicans or Democrats, we just have people. And education is something that we really are going to have to address when it comes to racism and anti-Semitism. And we need to get that money for education without, if there are going to be mandates to help us with these things, they have to be paid for by the federal
Thank you.
government.
Let's hear now from Catherine Parker, please.
So just within 3 weeks after the November 2016 election, I sent a letter to the county executive of Westchester saying that hate incidents were on the rise. I was seeing it in my district, but I knew from social media it was happening all over the area. And I called for 3 things to happen for Westchester. That county executive didn't act on it, so we in Mass acted on changing the administration. And since that change in administration and having the majority, we passed a lot of human rights legislation like the ban on conversion therapy. If I were in Congress, I'm going to be working hard for all of our rights, because what we've seen is we are all at risk. It's not just the Jewish community or the African Americans, it's all of us.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Scott. And welcome back to our special debate sponsored by News 12 and the Westchester and Rockland Democratic Party. We are having a conversation with the candidates of the 17th Congressional District, if you're just joining us, all about rising hate in our neighborhoods. 8 of the 10 candidates have answered. We have 2 left to go, so we're going to turn things over now to Joanna Rodriguez-Wheeler.
Anti-Semitism is a hate crime. I support educating children that the Holocaust actually happened. A lot of folks believe that it didn't actually happen. There are a lot of folks that aren't teaching their children how not to hate. We cannot change what is in people's hearts. People will hate, but we can do something about educating people about the things that have happened, what these people lived through, and to make sure that it never happens again. So we need to teach them about the hate symbols, we need to teach them about what are hateful words, and we need to bring the communities together in an interfaith way to get some understanding so that when they go out into the world, they're not feeling this constant threat.
Mr. Schleifer, how can we stop rising hate in our communities?
I'm so glad you asked this question. In 1947, my grandparents came here after their mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, grandparents, everyone were murdered for the crime of being Jewish. Nothing has been more central to my identity than understanding the dangers of anti-Semitism, and I will fight to my dying breath to make sure that we stamp out that scourge here and everywhere around the world. Now, I've done that also taking on violence as a federal prosecutor. I understand how to take on gun violence, and it's so sad that when I visited the victims at Rabbi Reutenberg's home of this horrible attack in Muncie, I was left to say, thank God it wasn't a gun and it was only a machete. So we need to take on gun violence, and I commend the Governor Cuomo for doing things like installing license plate readers and other things. And
Mr. Schleifer, thank you. Sorry to cut you off. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Everybody to our special primary coverage of the Democratic primary. We want to go right now to a general question for all of our panelists, and it will go in reverse alphabetical order. We'll start with Mr. Schleifer, and you'll have 1 minute to respond. We'll go to Sarah Toland for that question.
Well, it's an issue I've reported on often here in Rockland County. Illegal housing has been a problem in this district for many years, and local governments have been ineffective at fighting that issue. If elected, what, if anything, would you do to correct this problem? Mr. Schleifer, we'll start with you.
From the vantage of Congress, the best thing that Congress can do to address the housing affordability crisis is to ensure that we have appropriate tax credits that support developers of affordable housing to actually build the inventory we need to increase the supply and make affordable housing a reality. So we need tax credits that both encourage affordable development, but also tax credits that encourage green development, and I think we can achieve the two with a smart tax code. We need to do better work on that. We need to repeal Donald Trump's tax plan and then do more intelligent things to really support people at all points in the economic spectrum so that they can live in affordable and green and appropriate housing all across America.
All right, thank you. Joanna Rodriguez-Wheeler.
Can you please repeat the question?
Absolutely. Illegal housing has been a problem in this district for many years. Local governments are ineffective at fighting it. If elected, what, if anything, would you do to correct the problem?
Well, housing is a serious problem. We have a homeless population that needs help. And I think we need to build more affordable housing. I think we need to build more affordable housing in mixed-use developments. I think that the focus on building what is affordable housing, where affordable starts at what most people is a lot of money, $60K, is just not sustainable. I think that the units that we do build don't actually have enough units available for, let's say, a family of 4 or 5. So we actually need to do something that doesn't involve people having to scramble for their living arrangements, because we already have too many people on the street and we can't see any more people on the street.
Thank you. Catherine Parker.
Sure. So from my 12 years in office, I can tell you that I know that, well, you may be frustrated here in Rockland with with the illegal housing. It is, New York State is a home rule state, and that unfortunately means that it's up to the local jurisdiction. So I have to answer that first. But I would like to also add and chime in that we know that we need a lot of affordable housing in this region. And I do believe that if we had a Green New Deal, what we can do is then incentivize local municipalities to work with developers to build green infrastructure and affordable housing that uses renewable energy. That's really going to put people to work for the jobs, the green economy, and it's going to provide better housing than what we really have right now.
Thank you. Shane McGaffey.
Okay, so one of the reasons that so many people live in illegal apartments is because housing here is really, really expensive. And even affordable housing here is really expensive because, you know, very often we're using federal rates in terms of dictating what 80% of the value would be for someone to have to live in an affordable housing cost. So to qualify for affordable housing in this area, you have to make less than $80,000 a year. And $80,000 a year, actually $79,000 a year, you're already in a higher tax bracket, but in other parts of the country, that amount would be getting you much more in terms of affordable housing. So what we have to really do, and we've talked about it before, is adjust the regional cost index so that people here who are struggling get more from the federal government.
All right, thank you. Mondaire Jones.
We are faced with a housing affordability crisis. We are ground zero for that here in Rockland and in Westchester counties. But it is a multifaceted response that we have to undertake. Yes, we need to invest heavily in building more units that are affordable for people. We also need to recognize that there are thousands of people in this district, despite having college degrees, are still having to live at home with their parents because they can't afford to be out on their own paying rent or buying a home. So we have to look at tuition-free public colleges and universities going forward and forgiving student debt to liberate an entire generation of young people to meaningfully participate in this economy. And we also need to make sure that as we build affordable housing, we're building it closer to public transportation so that people are able to easily get to and from work without going bankrupt.
Thank you. Allison Fine.
Thanks for the question. I'm running for federal office here, and the place where the federal government comes into play for affordable housing is through HUD. And HUD has not updated its standards for how it calculates poverty in over 30 years. And you can draw a direct line, you can connect the dots between when the federal government stopped investing in HUD and stopped investing in affordable housing for communities around the country, and the rise of the lack of affordable housing. There was a recent report in Westchester County that the county is down 11,000 units of affordable housing. So my job as a member of Congress is to make sure that HUD is updated and is fully functioning to support affordable housing in this district.
Thank you. Evelyn Farkas.
Thank you again for the question. We have a crisis in affordable housing in Rockland and Westchester counties. It's also a nationwide crisis, but most people don't understand that it's a problem for us here locally, and we need federal help. Now, how do we get that help? First of all, we need to make sure that HUD gets a bigger share of the budget of the national budget, because the budget for HUD has gone down. It's a third the size of what it was in the 1970s. Second, we need to expand tax credits so that people can afford housing. Third, we need to increase the trust that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac hold that, again, helps people with affordable housing. But in addition to that, I think we need to be creative. We need to look at repurposing old buildings, much as actually this building, which was a church once before, has been repurposed as a meeting place. So we need to look at repurposing buildings and also modular housing, new ways to create affordable housing. Thank you.
Thanks. Asha, Castleberry, Hernandez.
Hi, I have been the only candidate since day one advocating for addressing this issue when it comes to affordable housing, because we are facing a housing crisis. This is what I hear all the time in the throughout the district, speaking to a lot of constituents. And I must say, I disagree with Assemblymember David Buchwald when it comes to universal rent control, because this is one of the reasons why I do support rent control mechanism on the federal level, because we have so many people that have expressed to me in this district saying that they're being taken advantage of by rental property owners, and they continue to rise their cost of living, and it is appalling, and they feel that their voices are not heard. So we need to make sure that there's some sort of mediation as part of this policy that I support, to make sure that we address this crisis in this district.
Thank you. David Carlucci.
On a state level, I've worked to bring our building code policies into the 21st century. I've also supported and passed the Emergency Tenant Protection Act to make sure that tenants have rights and that unscrupulous landlords are held accountable. I've also led the fight to increase supportive housing. That means people living with disabilities and mental health issues have the supports to live independent, productive lives. Do it and also on scattered site housing to make sure that it's dispersed throughout the community and people are integrated in the community. This is a way to tackle overdevelopment, to illegal housing, and to make sure that people have an affordable and a proper place to live. These are the fights that we have to bring to the federal level, particularly when it comes to affordable housing and supportive housing. We need a partner in HUD, we need a partner in the federal government. New York State can't do it alone, and that's why I'm running to be the next member of Congress.
Thank you, David. David Buchwald.
Though the federal government isn't typically involved in code enforcement and zoning enforcement, the reason unscrupulous landlords can prey on tenants with illegal housing is because there aren't enough alternatives, safe places for them to live. And I am very committed to having a federal government that is a true partner in promoting affordable housing and making sure that our far too often dilapidated public housing is reinvested in. The federal government also plays a role in preventing discrimination when it comes to housing, ever since the Fair Housing Act, a law that New York State currently is not fully in compliance with, which is part of why just this week I passed in the State Assembly in a committee legislation to bring us back into compliance with the Federal Fair Housing Act. But I will say that if your solution to fair housing is to make sure that bureaucrats in Washington are deciding what the rent should be in Nyack versus Conjures, whether it be in Harrison versus White Plains, good luck with that. I don't think it's going to work. DC is not the solution to setting rental prices all across our country.
And David, we want to give you an extra 20 seconds to respond to Asha, Castleberry, Hernandez bringing up universal rent control.
Sure, I think I just did. I will say that there's absolutely a serious crisis when it comes to housing and affordability, but we have to have leaders who will not just go for talking points, but will actually work on getting problems solved. That's exactly what I've been doing. First 3 years in White Plains on the City Council, and then 7 years in the State Assembly. White Plains is a place that is growing and thriving and meeting the needs of folks at all levels, although there's a lot more work to be done. I'm proud of the record that my home city has. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, panel. Great job out there. We do have a little bit of time left, but not enough time to have 10 people respond to a question. So we are going to take another quick break, and we will be right back with more of this primary debate coming right up. And welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are in the home stretch of this Democratic primary debate for the 17th Congressional District. We want to now go to some questions from our audience. Actually, we have time for one question. Panel, we have 10 people on the panel. It's been very difficult, but we've had a great time and we've had some great answers from everybody. Yes, so we do have time for one question. You'll have 30 seconds each, and Tara Rosenblum has that question.
Yes, an incredibly engaged audience. We got about 30 questions, took the one off the top of the stack randomly. The Trump administration has consistently attacked LGBTQ rights. Again, this is a question from the audience, not us. From denying trans service members to serve openly to not pushing for federal legislation to protect LGBTQ people. How will you support the LGBTQ community once you're in Congress? And we will start with
Mr. Schleifer.
Mr. Schleifer.
So, thank you for the question. It is a travesty, the divisiveness that we see from the White House and targeting all sorts of different groups as a convenient way to rally a hateful and pernicious base of support, and that's unacceptable. And as to the LGBTQ community, first of all, we need federal legislation to show in no uncertain terms that Title VII and the like applies also to any kind of discrimination on the basis of sexuality or sexual identity. Also, we should talk about health insurance. Health insurance companies now do not cover fertility services, and it's an underreported aspect of this that every single LGBTQ family that wants to start a family of their own, therefore is being told by health insurance companies across America that those services need not be covered because they're not essential. But what is more essential for those families than starting a family? And that needs to
Thank you,
change.
Mr. Schleifer. We hand things over now to Joanna Rodriguez-Wheeler.
Well, the LGBTQ community has been under constant threat, as we know. And I feel that one of the things that is most important to this community is being accepted. And that involves, once again, education, and it involves letting people know that folks that are LGBTQ are just like the rest of us, and they should be allowed to have families and adopt and make whatever life they choose.
Catherine Parker.
So, as it was stated earlier, the Trump administration has been looking at all of our differences and trying to say we're all other. And we really have to fight back. One of the things that I think, we look at Washington and we see that we've never even been able to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. And why is it that we wouldn't be talking about the Equal Rights Amendment in terms of also our LGBTQ community? To the question of healthcare, absolutely, no question. Every individual, whether or not their sexuality, should have the right to have a...
We have to cut you off, I'm sorry. We're going to hear now from Shane McGaffey.
You know, I think this should be a no-brainer. Conservatives supposedly believe that, you know, the government should not be involved in, you know, who you marry, what's going on in your bedroom, how you identify, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't understand what business they have being involved in, you know, in those issues at all. I think it's very simple to explain to them that they're barking up the wrong tree here.
Mondaire Jones, let's hear your perspective.
This is personal for me. I recently told a story about how in November of 2008, when I was a senior at Stanford University, Barack Obama was elected our nation's first black president, but that was also the same night that Proposition 8 in California passed, which prohibited gay marriage. Fast forward 12 years, the Supreme Court is considering whether federal law prohibits employers from firing people for being members of the LGBTQ community. So we need to strengthen our federal statutes, obviously, but we also need to recognize that there's discrimination in other areas of life. We know that queer people are more likely to have student debt and more likely to have difficulty accessing health care. It's why I'm fighting for Medicare for all and why I'm fighting for tuition-free public colleges and student debt forgiveness in this country so that everyone can live in dignity.
Allison Fine.
I have a son who is gay, and this is a very difficult issue because imagining that my son was discriminated against just for his sexuality would be just dreadful. And it is a reflection of this administration's unending cruelty that they would pick on trans people in this way. And it's also a reflection of the fact that our people and our politics are not aligned right now, and that most people do not want this kind of discrimination to continue, and this is why we need Democrats to win elections.
Let's hear now from Evelyn Farkas.
I grew up in the 70s and 80s when things were worse, and this president wants to take us back there. We all have family members, I have family members, loved ones, who have been positively affected by things that were done under the president who appointed me to federal office, Barack Obama. I'm proud that I worked in the Defense Department to increase equality, to allow people to serve regardless of gender identity, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation. We need an Equality Act in this country, and we need to continue the work that was started before and finish it for all Americans.
3 more candidates to hear from. Let's move on to Asha, Castleberry, Hernandez.
I served in the military with LGBT service members, and after President Obama got rid of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, we were building a lot of cooperation, and even with benefits and accommodating the LGBT community. The issue involving President Trump when he banned transgender soldiers, that was a big hit for us, but we were able to still accommodate the LGBT community, despite that they were very, very concerned about what the Commander-in-Chief did. So I'm optimistic about it, we can move forward.
Thank you, Senator Carlucci.
I'm so proud to have co-sponsored and to pass marriage equality in the New York State Senate, to co-sponsor and pass GENDA, to ban conversion therapy. And also, we know that LGBT youth are far more likely to be the victims of bullying, of abuse, of harassment. That's why we need Dignity for All Students Act nationwide, and we need parity with healthcare to make sure that anyone has eligibility to get fertility treatments and surrogacy available to everyone who wants it.
And we conclude with Assemblyman David Buchwald.
Our federal civil rights laws need to incorporate bans on discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender expression. I was a co-sponsor of the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act that's now law here in New York. I was also the lead sponsor of the Restoration of Honor Act that restores state veterans' benefits to those who were discharged because of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy.
Mr. Buchwald, give us your 30-second closing statement.
I hope you will all join David Buchwald campaign to help elect a progressive Democrat who really gets results. For more information, because I don't only have 30 seconds right now, please visit davidbuchwaldforcongress.com. That's DAVIDBUCHWALDFORCONGRESS.
Well, I'm Senator David Carlucci. I've served as the town clerk in the town of Clarkstown, as state senator for the past 10 years. This last year, I passed more legislation than any lawmaker in the state of New York. I have the energy, the experience to hit the ground running where Congresswoman Lowy leaves off. I ask for your vote. Please go to davidcarlucci.com, and I won't let you down, and I'll deliver for our district. Thank you.
Asha, go!
My name is Asha Hernandez. I'm a combat veteran, a major in the Army Reserves, as well as an educator and a mom. I am the only one that deeply understands the issues that are impacting the working class. I also have extensive experience in national security and foreign policy, which we do need in the federal position. So if you want to elect me or you're interested in me, please follow me at www.ashaforcongress.com.
Evelyn Farkas.
We are losing a legend, a woman of great stature who is currently our representative, Nita Lowy. She literally controls the purse strings right now in the House of Representatives. So we have a choice. We can elect someone who will need a year or 6 months or some certain amount of time to learn the ropes, or we can pick someone like me who has experience already legislating, drafting and passing legislation at the federal level, has national media stature, and
Allison Fine. I'm sorry, Allison Fine.
I am a national leader in the use of technology for social good. I've written 3 books on the topic, and I now work for the Gates Foundation on how to use artificial intelligence and automation for good. I'm also the immediate past chair of the National Board of NAACP. I am also locally the past president of my synagogue and the founder of the Network of Elected Women. This is exactly the moment in time where we need somebody with outside leadership to lead this country.
This government has never worked for everyone. And so as this race has gotten crowded, I'm running for Congress because for me, policy is personal. I grew up in Section 8 housing and on food stamps in the East Rambler Central School District, but made it to Stanford University, Harvard Law School, worked in the Obama administration at the Justice Department, and then went to work for Westchester County, litigating the county's biggest cases. I have centered the climate crisis and other issues.
Thank you, Shane.
I'm running for Congress to protect your families, your children, and your money. And for more information, please go to ShaneMcGaffey for Congress.org. so you can understand how we need to change the regional cost index so that we can keep more of our money here and do more things for our community. Thank you.
I like that. Catherine, short, what I mean. Catherine.
Catherine Parker, and thank you for being here and asking so many good questions. There are three of us up here that have actually are legislators, and only one of them is a woman who's a legislator. So we have Nita Lowy, who has done tremendous things. We need to send another woman to Washington. I would say visit my website at catherineforcongress.com to hear more, but I've talked to you about climate change, and certainly it is the issue of the day.
All right, Joanna Rodriguez.
I'm a new leader for Our Shared Future. Our shared future is one where our kids should have safe drinking water. Our shared future is one where one medical bill or a surprise bill doesn't make you bust the budget. I am running for Congress because I want to make sure that all families can thrive in our economy, not just the lucky few.
All right, and Mr. Schleifer.
We've been living in a slow motion nightmare with Donald Trump in the White House. We're more divided, we're more fraught, and we have less faith in one another and our Constitution than ever before. I agree with Mondaire and others that politics and policy is personal. For me, it also has to be interpersonal. I've worked in federal government and in state government with brave federal agents at the ATF and the FBI who love Fox News, although I hate it, and it didn't mean I didn't work with them. It meant we got stuff done to do things for the community, to take guns off the streets, to fight environmental crime, and to make this country better, and that's exactly what I'm going to do for you in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schleifer, and thank you, panel. We had a great discussion tonight. It's something you guys that we really want to talk. All right, so I do want to thank the Rockland and Westchester County Democratic Party for hosting this, and the Nyack Center. It's been a great event, and to our audience tonight, thank you for joining us. Plus, Tara Rosenblum, Tara Toland, and to you folks at home, thank you very much for joining us, and don't forget to get out and vote.
So it's the same time.